Hi guys, welcome to Dr. Davis Explains It All, and today we're going to be talking about the four visual cues. So I'd like to start off by talking about one of the artists that we're really looking at this week, among many others as well, but the artist Georges Seurat was a French painter and also a draftsman. So his large work, Sunday Afternoon on Isle of La Grande Jatte, was probably his most famous painting. And it really altered the direction of modern art for initiating what we call a neo-impressionism, and that's one of the icons of 19th century painting. So that's not something you have to remember, but it's just kind of a little tidbit of information. Now you might be saying, well, what in the world is neo-impressionism? Don't worry, like I said, you don't have to remember this, but just so you know, because we want to gain more understanding of these concepts in this course, that neo-impressionism is a term applied to, it's an avant-garde art movement that really flourished principally in France from about the 1880s until the early 1900s. So, led by the example of artists such as Georges Seurat, artists of this neo-impressionist circle, they really renounced the random spontaneity of impressionism in favor of a more measured painting technique that was grounded in science and the study of optics. Now, I'm going to get into that in just a minute, but now neo-impressionists came to believe that separate touches of interwoven pigment resulted in a greater vibrancy of color in the observer's eye than is achieved by the conventional mixing of pigments on a palette. So this meticulous paint application would, or at least they felt it would, capture shimmers of light on the canvas. So on that note, you'll see in your readings this week that the separation of color through individual strokes of pigment that I'm talking about right now came to be known as, that came to be known as divisionism, while the application of precise dots of paint came to be called pointillism. So let's check it out a little bit so that you have a better understanding. All right, so excuse me. There we go. This is A Sunday Afternoon on the Isle of La Grande Jatte, and it's a very famous piece by Georges Seurat. It's one that is was created using pointillism. So remember what I said. Pointillism is the application of precise dots of paint to form a greater picture there. So this isn't something that was just simply created through brush strokes. No, this piece, the entire piece is created through tiny little dots of paint that made up an overall image on a canvas. So it's pretty interesting, especially if you can see it in person. But here's a better example, in my opinion, that you can really, really see that. So here you can start to, if you look right in here, you can really see the dots. And if you're looking at the Eiffel Tower, you can see much more of that as well. And so this is another great example of pointillism, and just a very beautiful, famous piece. I would love to see this in person. All right, so let's move on to one that you probably are going to be more familiar with, and that's going to be Van Gogh's Starry Night. So when creating an artist deconstruction on a work of art, you want to remember to analyze the piece using the four visual cues from your reading. So you're going to use color, form, depth, and movement to analyze the work of art. So you also want to explain how the artist makes use of these four visual cues, and I'm actually going to go over that in just a second. And in your deconstruction of this image, or the work of art, don't forget to also explain how the physiology of our eye helps us to see these four cues. So remember that the piece can be from any famous artist from any movement. So don't feel like you have to use Georges Seurat or Vincent van Gogh. You can choose any famous artist from any movement. So let's take a deeper look at this piece. I know many of you are familiar with it, but have you ever really looked at it from the four visual cues perspective: color, form, depth, and movement? So notice that the use of colors that we have in this piece. For Starry Night, Van Gogh uses stark color contrast, which is why we're so drawn to this piece. The cool saturated blues and greens in the sky and also in that landscape down below are opposed to the more warm saturated yellows and oranges that are above from the moon and the stars. And this is done to create a visual intensity, almost as if the night sky were fighting with each other, or a battlefield is a good way to describe it. So that's how color, one of the four visual cues, is present here, color. Then we have form. So let's think about form here. Remember that the form of a piece comes together in the brain as a response to three types of forms. And those three types of forms are going to be dots, lines, and shapes. So let's look at this piece. Notice how the techniques used here help us to unify this piece through those forms, dots, lines, and shapes. So you can see all that going on here. Next, we're going to talk about depth, and that's another one of the four visual cues. So let's use an example for this one. To the left of the painting, you'll see that there is a massive dark structure that helps to really develop a greater sense of size in the piece. Some even describe it as a sense of isolation in the piece. This structure is really magnificently large when compared to the scale of all the other objects in the painting. And a lot of people, have a lot of different speculation as to what this object actually is, and there's nothing definitive that we can say. But nonetheless, this creates depth in the piece. So the curving lines mirror that of the sky, and they really create this sensation of depth in the painting. This structure allows the viewer to interpret, or not even necessarily interpret, to really think about what it is. Some people have speculated it's a mountain. Other people say it's just a leafy bush that's up close. There's a wide variety of things that this can be, but nonetheless, this object, this really massive, large, dark object in the left of the piece, and actually I'll show it to you right here. This is what I'm talking about right here. It just works to create depth. It's so much larger than, let's say, the town below. Okay, and then lastly, we have movement. So below the rolling hills of the horizon lies that small town down here. There's a peaceful essence flowing from structure to structure there. And even perhaps the cool dark colors that are present here, and the fiery windows, can help us to spark memories of our own from our own life, from our childhood years, where we had tons of imagination about what exists in the night and what exists in dark starry skies. So the center point of the town is the tall steeple of the church, and you'll see that right here. This steeple just really reigns largely over the much smaller buildings. And this steeple casts down a sense of what some people call stability onto the town, and also helps to create that sense of size and seclusion as well. So all of these things help to create the movement in the piece. And even if we're going to look up here, we could tell the movement of the sky up here and how much movement there is there. And that is another indication of the movement in the piece. So hopefully that this example and just kind of the little bit of information we talked about will help you to draw your own thoughts on your readings and the content this week as far as the four visual cues of color, form, depth, and movement. Don't forget that you can choose, for an artist deconstruction, you can choose any piece that's from a famous artist that you'd like to analyze. And again, you're going to want to analyze that using color, form, depth, and movement, and make sure to explain how the artist makes use of these four cues. And of course, don't forget to explain how the physiology of the eye helps you to see these four cues. So with that in mind, if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to help. Otherwise, enjoy your week. Thank you very much, and thank you for tuning in to Dr. Davis Explains It All.